If you graduated last spring, there is a better than even chance you are not doing the job you trained for. Not unemployed. The headlines wanted mass unemployment, and it never came. Working. Just not at the thing the degree was supposed to be for. Ringing up customers, waiting tables, answering phones. A degree in your name and a job you could have had at 18, without the 4 years and without the debt. Here is the number. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York puts underemployment among recent college graduates at about 42%. It rose roughly 4 points over a couple of years and has been stuck in the low 40s ever since. More than 4 in 10. And it turns out where you land at the start is not a detail. Graduates who begin underemployed earn, on average, about $10,000 a year less than the classmates who didn't. Enough that a Federal Reserve economist put it flatly. An underemployed graduate ends up making about the same money as someone who dropped out of college. A recent graduate named Bunmi described the grind of it. 80% of her applications met with no response or an instant rejection. The rare interview ending with, "We're going with an internal hire." "I thought," she said, "I did everything right." She had. That is the whole problem. So here is the question this video answers, the one almost nobody asks, because the honest answer is darker than the headline. Not how many graduates are stuck down there, but what happens to them next. Does the survival job quietly become the real career, a year or two behind schedule? Or does the first rung you land on decide the entire climb? Because the data on that exact question is in. It comes from the Federal Reserve's own recent graduate numbers, a decade-long study out of the Burning Glass Institute, and the graduates' own accounts. And the answer is the part of this story that no one is telling. Start with what didn't happen, because it matters. The class of 2025 did not walk into mass unemployment. The headlines wanted a number like the Great Depression, and it never came. Recent graduate unemployment sits at about 5.7%, elevated and notably higher than the workforce as a whole, which is its own quiet alarm, but not a catastrophe. The catastrophe is hiding one word over. It's not that these graduates aren't working, it's what they're working. Quick context, in one sentence, so this stands on its own. For a century, the entry-level job was a bargain. The graduate did the grunt work, and in exchange, the firm taught them the trade. That bargain is what turned a 22-year-old with a diploma into a 30-year-old with a profession. And for the class of 2025, at the scale the data can see, that first rung was simply not there. So they took what was. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York keeps a running scoreboard on graduates aged 22 to 27, and its underemployment rate now sits at about 42%, up roughly 4 points over the previous couple of years, and holding stubbornly there. Look at where they actually are, and the picture sharpens. The St. Louis Fed's breakdown shows underemployed graduates clustered in retail, food service, hospitality, and front desk administrative work. The economics graduate managing the phone store. The biology major behind the coffee counter. The communications graduate on the register. Working. The unemployment statistics count them as wins. But standing on a rung that doesn't connect to the ladder they spent 4 years, and often, 6 figures qualifying for. And here's the reflex everyone has at this point, including me. So what? Plenty of people take a survival job out of school and climb out of it within a year or two. Underemployment has always existed. Maybe this is just a slow start. That reflex is exactly what the next number destroys. The real question isn't how many graduates are down there, it's how many ever get out. And that is the question the Burning Glass Institute and the Strada Institute for the Future of Work set out to answer. By tracking college graduates across the first decade of their careers, not just the first year. Their finding is the quiet center of this entire story, so I want to state it plainly. The first job is destiny. Here's what the data shows. About half of graduates land in a college-level job within a year. The other half, the underemployed half, do not simply drift upward over time. Graduates who start out underemployed are roughly 5 times more likely to still be underemployed 5 years later. Quick, then straight back, because it gets worse from here. If a finding like that is why you're here, subscribe. Obsolete is one ongoing investigation into what AI is actually doing to work and business. A new chapter most weeks, and this story is a long way from over. Okay, the worst part. Of the people still stuck at that 5-year mark, 74% are still underemployed a full decade after their first job. Now hold that against the mirror image. Graduates who start in a genuine college-level role almost never fall out of one. Around 79% of them are still in college-level work 10 years later. An economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, Oksana Lukina, has a word for what happens to the other group: scarring. And she is precise about the mechanism, which is the part that should worry you. You're not going to gain the skills, she says, if you're just staying in that kind of job. And your resume is going to reflect your job history. It's going to be really hard to get out of that. The survival job doesn't just fail to help. It quietly writes the story the next employer reads. And that story keeps you where you are. Now, in fairness, and the New York Fed itself makes this point, plenty of underemployed graduates do climb out. The picture of the philosophy major stuck behind an espresso machine forever is overdrawn. But plenty is not most. Read the longitudinal numbers together, and the comfortable idea of just a slow start still collapses for the majority. Your trajectory isn't set by your degree so much as by the first job you take with it. The job you grab to make rent in the summer of 2025 is, for a lot of the people in it, not a detour. It's the road. And the cost isn't only the title. Underemployed graduates earn, on average, about $10,000 less every year than their classmates in college-level work. Compound a $10,000 gap across a career, add the promotions and the raises that stack on top of a higher base, and the slow start becomes a permanently lower ceiling. Why does the first job lock in like that? It's not a mystery, and it's not bad character. It's mechanics. The college-level job is where you build the professional instinct nobody can teach you in a lecture. The thing that flinches when a number looks wrong before you can say why. It's where you meet the people who later hire you and refer you. It's the line on the resume that tells the next employer you can do the work. Miss that first rung, and every one of those advantages compounds for someone else while you're pulling espresso shots. That's the trap. Which leads to the obvious question: why did the first rung disappear for this class in particular? And here's where AI walks into the story, but not in the way the headlines told you. Here's where the story turns. The easy version is, AI took the jobs. The accurate version is stranger and more specific. AI didn't take the jobs. It ate the rung where the jobs used to teach you. Look at the cause side. According to Signal Fire, a venture fund that tracks hiring across hundreds of millions of professional profiles, entry-level hiring at the big technology companies is down roughly 65% compared to 2019, and down about 76% at early-stage startups. Overall tech hiring only softened. The front door is what collapsed. And it's not just tech. Britain's largest graduate employers, the Big Four accounting firms, cut their graduate intake too. KPMG by 29%, from 1,400 graduates in a year down to 942. Now, why the entry level specifically? Because the entry level was always the grunt work. Reading the 10,000 pages, ticking and tying the numbers, writing the test cases. And a language model will do that work for $20 a month and never ask for a promotion. The tasks that used to train a junior are exactly the tasks that automated first. The ladder didn't get shorter from the top. It lost its bottom rung. But I promised you no doom, so let's be honest about the other side, because it's real. AI is a driver here, not the only one. Some of that Big Four work went offshore, the old-fashioned way. Job openings across the economy fell to their lowest level since 2020. And entry-level postings that demand 3 years of experience were pricing kids out long before ChatGPT existed. The Economic Policy Institute makes the sober point plainly. About 85% of young graduates still work in occupations that have been growing. The problem isn't that the knowledge economy vanished. The problem is the on-ramp onto it. Even the warning that everyone quoted deserves a second look. Anthropic's chief executive, Dario Amodei, told Axios that AI could wipe out half of entry-level white-collar jobs and push unemployment to 10 or 20% within 5 years. Hold that at arm's length. He sells the technology. Doom is also a sales pitch. But set his warning next to the Fed's 42% and the burning glass persistence data, and you don't need his prediction to come true. The damage the data already documents isn't a future spike in unemployment. It's the quiet removal of the rung where a career is built, which means the harm doesn't show up as a gap on a resume. It shows up as a decade of earning $10,000 less. So is the class of 2025 a lost generation, or just a delayed one? There is a genuine counterforce, and it would be dishonest to end without weighing it. Start with the boomerang. The companies that most loudly cut people for AI have quietly been hiring again. Klarna, the poster child for AI can do all the jobs, went back to recruiting human agents. And the one that matters most for these graduates, IBM, which had talked openly about automating back-office roles, said it was tripling its US entry-level hiring. The pendulum that swung hard toward replace the juniors is swinging back, because the firms are discovering in real time that if you stop hiring 22-year-olds, in 10 years, you have no 32-year-olds who know how anything works. Signal Fire's own analysts put it bluntly. By gutting the graduate pipeline to flatter this quarter's balance sheet, the industry may be manufacturing its own leadership vacuum a decade out. There's a second escape route, and it's a strange one. That same Signal Fire data found new graduates are now about twice as likely to become a founder as they were at the 2022 market peak. Locked out of the ladder, some of them are building their own, and a few of the tasks that used to be a junior's job description are quietly becoming a new one. The person who operates the AI, manages the automated workflows, audits what the model produces. The agent operator. It's early, and it's not a mass solution, but it's a real door where the old one closed. But here's where honesty cuts the other way, too. Go back to the persistence data. A boomerang that arrives in 2027 doesn't unscar the graduate who's already spent 18 months on the register, because the trajectory was set by the first job, and that job is already behind them. The counterforce is real, but it's a counterforce for the next class, not a rescue for this one. For a large slice of the class of 2025, the damage the first rung was supposed to prevent has already been done, quietly, invisibly, and on schedule. One honest caveat first, because the data demands it. Not every underemployed graduate is a casualty. The same Federal Reserve research finds these grads often land jobs with higher intrinsic quality, more autonomy, more variety, more respect, more room to keep learning. And some of them, the economists openly admit, may simply be choosing meaning over money. The social worker, the writer, the person who runs the community library. Below median pay, and not a mistake. So this is not a story about every degree being worthless, or every barista being a victim. But here's the verdict, and I'll make it falsifiable, because that's the deal on this channel. For the large share who did not choose it, who wanted the college-level rung and could not reach it, the numbers are not soft. This was not a recession. A recession is a gap. The economy contracts, people wait, and when it lifts, the ladder is still standing and they climb it. What happened to the class of 2025 is a structural change. The first rung of the white-collar ladder was removed, and the damage doesn't sit in a year of unemployment that later heals. It compounds, in a decade of underemployment and a permanently lower ceiling, which is exactly what the Burning Glass data predicts, and what a mere slow start theory can't explain. If this were only cyclical, the 5-year and 10-year persistence would break as the economy recovered. It doesn't. That's the tell. And if you want the one practical takeaway, it's the same for the graduate and for the employer. Read from opposite ends. For anyone early in a career, the single highest leverage move is to get onto a college-level rung as fast as possible. Even a lateral one, even an unglamorous one, even adjacent to your field. Because the data says the first real job is the compounding variable, not the diploma and not the survival job. And if you're still choosing what to study, know that the field is not neutral. The Fed's own numbers run from a 9% underemployment rate for nursing graduates to 67% for criminal justice majors. The degree that connects to a specific, licensed, hard-to-automate job still buys you the rung. The one that doesn't, increasingly doesn't. And for any company still cutting its junior pipeline to make a quarter look good, you are not saving money. You are eating the seed corn, and the bill arrives in 10 years with no one qualified to pay it. The class of 2025 did everything they were told. The deal they were promised got quietly rewritten while they were standing in line for it. What happens to the class of 2026 depends entirely on whether the people who own the ladder remember what the bottom rung was actually for.